It was an ordinary Friday in May 2017 for the UK's National Health Service. GPs across the country were working through their daily lists of patients. Ambulances were responding to call-outs, and hospitals were treating the most sick. Then, suddenly, an emergency of a different kind struck. NHS computer screens started turning red and displaying the message, "Oops, your files have been encrypted," along with the image of a padlock. There was also an instruction to pay a $300 ransom to recover those files, or else they'd be destroyed. The NHS declared a major incident as fears grew that this could be the moment an attack in cyberspace caused death in the real world. In the end, that didn't happen. But the WannaCry attack is still the gravest known cyber emergency suffered by the UK to date, impacting thousands of patients. And it could have been much worse, had it not been for a 22-year-old hacker called Marcus Hutchins, who disabled the virus from his bedroom in his parents' house in Devon.
It kind of felt surreal at first because it was not how difficult you'd expect stopping an attack like this to be. I was like, wow, that was a little too easy.
While the NHS was the highest profile victim, the WannaCry attack impacted more than 200,000 computers across 150 countries around the world. The UK and the US has since blamed a group of North Korean hackers. States, criminals and terrorists all use cyber to attack each other in the grey zone. It puts anyone with a computer in the firing line, but also means that anyone who understands computers has the ability to fight back. The most sophisticated malware can be designed to cause large-scale physical harm. Think a cyber Pearl Harbor or a cyber 9/11, with mass casualties and devastation. That hasn't happened yet, but the WannaCry attack shows that this threat from the grey zone is real. My name is Deborah Haynes. I'm the Foreign Affairs Editor at Sky News, and you're listening to my podcast, Into the Grey Zone, which explores a murky evolution of warfare. I'll explain the covert tactics used by states, criminals and terrorist groups to deceive, gain influence, and at times, kill. In this episode, we look at the growing threat to real life from cyberspace and what the UK is doing about it. I also talked to Marcus Hutchins about the part he played in stopping the WannaCry cyber attack.
Cyber threat takes about 3 forms, really.
Kieran Martin set up and ran an organisation tasked with responding to cyber attacks in the UK. The National Cyber Security Centre, or NCSC for short, is a public-facing part of the country's top secret intelligence agency, GCHQ.
One is essentially about theft, and that could be very simple theft. It could be theft of money, but it could be theft of more complicated things like intellectual property. Increasingly, it's about theft of data. Sometimes that can be strategically important, and that takes you into a second category of cyber attacks, which is essentially about strategic advantage and disadvantage, using it outside of anything close to war or armed conflict to gain some sort of advantage. So here's an example of data theft that's a strategic disadvantage. In 2015, the US confirmed that the Chinese state had walked off with the federal government's database of prospective and current employees and their security clearance forms.
Let me just step in here to elaborate, because this is a big deal, especially given the state of relations today between the US and China. In 2015, it emerged that a suspected Chinese cyber hack of the US Office of Personnel Management succeeded in stealing personal data on more than 20 million federal government-linked workers, including the fingerprints of more than 5 million people. That means Beijing could have a database that would flag up potential US intelligence officers making it harder for them to work against China. Though the Chinese government has always denied the hacking allegation.
The UK learned a lot from that case. I think we weren't certainly thinking that that could never happen in the UK. There was very much a sort of there but for the grace of God, and that's the sort of thing that, you know, countries like here and allies are having to look very carefully at.
And I guess also there must be a counter-espionage concern too, because it means that anyone going to China who's on that list suddenly becomes of more interest, perhaps.
Exactly, and you know, going beyond that, I think spying is, for centuries, has been opportunistic, and you've mentioned a very significant area where that sort of data set would be useful, but also it is more generally useful in terms of understanding, you know, the way in which bits of the state where you've got the data from, how it works, who's who, and so on. So that's why you see, you know, going beyond that particular case, that's why you see attacks on that sort of data set all over the world, really.
The second category of cyber threat, listed by Kieran, also includes the secret planting of computer viruses on another country's critical national infrastructure, things like power stations or communication cables or airports. These intrusions can be for spying or for giving the attacker the ability to cause trouble in the future.
What we call in the cyber trade preposition, to gain a leverage so that if there is a tension between country A and country B, country A's got some implants down on country B's essential systems and can utilise that. So that's the second part, is strategic competition, if you like, but short of anything like conflict.
So, cyber theft, cyber advantage, and then there is cyber destruction.
And then the third part takes you into the more the area of actual harm. The one thing that hasn't happened yet, despite all the speculation and warnings over 20 to 30 years, is some sort of cyber catastrophe. Various US defense secretaries have warned of cyber Pearl Harbors. We haven't come close to that yet, and actually attacking deliberately a computer system to cause physical harm to lots of people is really quite hard, and not many people can do it, and thankfully those who can do it tend to be rational and therefore don't do it lightly. So some of the terrorist groups, for example, who we know have nihilist tendencies and sadly would love to kill hundreds and thousands of people, cannot do it via cyber means. But what we can see is large-scale disruption of public services, commercial activity. That can be done by states, sometimes accidentally, as we saw with a Russian attack on Ukraine in 2017 that spread into Western companies.
He's talking about NotPetya, which is one of the world's most devastating cyber attacks to date. Russian hackers are suspected of unleashing the malware against Ukraine in June 2017, but it went viral and spread across the planet, encrypting and destroying data on all infected computers. The Kremlin has denied involvement. Unintended victims ranged from the shipping giant Maersk in Denmark to a chocolate factory in Tasmania. The total financial cost from the attack is thought to have been more than $10 billion.
It was masquerading as ransomware, but it was actually disruptive. It was supposed to effectively, degrade the systems and do commercial damage. It wasn't designed to hurt anybody, and it didn't hurt anybody. It was designed to inflict economic pain.
I find it really hard to understand how a bit of malware or a bit of cyber could cause significant death. How does it happen? How could that happen? What sort of things would have to be hit for that to happen?
In 2015, it is widely believed that a Russian state attack on the city of Kiev's electricity supply put the city into darkness, depending on where you were, for between 1 and 6 hours at various parts, particularly in the winter, with no heating. If that went on for a prolonged period of time, you might find some people in harm's way. There are concerns, although, as I say, resilience should be a real part of this story, but there are always concerns about industrial control systems, as they're called, or SCADA systems.
What are they?
Well, basically, the control in mind of a blast furnace, for example. So can you hack into the computer controls for a blast furnace and set it on fire and killing anybody who's near it? That sort of thing. Okay. So that's the sort of way in which people have speculated about it in the past. Could you have the complete shutdown of military systems, for example, and so on? And then, again, Hollywood hasn't helped us here. If you go back all the way to 1984 and War Games, where, a teenager in I think it's Chicago, isn't it, hacks into the Pentagon and starts launching nuclear missiles. I mean, when you step back and think about it, that really shouldn't be possible. And so far as I know, it isn't.
And it was one of the diehards as well, and wasn't that quite more realistic when they had like a computer hacker that turned off all the traffic light systems and things?
Yeah, so I think there are things, I mustn't have seen that particular, I think I lost count after Die Hard 3.
It might have been 4.
There are possibilities like that.
Think about all the technology used in daily life, from smartphones, tablets and watches, to smart cars, televisions, and even for some, smart fridges. A cyber attack on any of these items could have real-world consequences for whoever's using them. In fact, the opportunity to cause harm with cyber weapons is so great that the cyber world is now an entire warfighting domain in its own right, alongside land, sea, air and space.
The cyber domain is really a new and very much invisible domain for conflict.
Marietje Schaake is Policy Director at Stanford University's Cyber Policy Centre and a Dutch former member of the European Parliament.
And I think what makes the digital realm, or cyberspace as some people call it, so relevant today is that on the one hand, more and more people rely on digital connections and also in infrastructure and in industry and with the Internet of Things. The Internet is really in ever more places. And that means that the potential attack space for those who want to do harm is increasing. And so any vulnerability, any human weakness, any lack of proper safeguards and protections can be exploited. And on the other hand, we see that the legal frameworks that we know, for example, the threshold of an act of war, or other kinds of accountability mechanisms, or legal provisions that can help deter bad actors or ensure accountability after an attack, are lagging behind. And so it gives a lot of space for people who want to do harm. They could be state actors, non-state actors, criminals, terrorist groups, or intelligence services, to stay just below the known thresholds, for example, of an act of war, and operate in this very gray zone where they know or they anticipate that they'll never face consequences for what they do. And I think that in and of itself, the lack of accountability there, erodes trust in our governments, because we can read about data breaches or hacks and attacks almost every day, but we hardly ever read about who is held to account after attacking a hospital or holding ransom a university, or eavesdropping or hacking human rights defenders. So this is a very, very serious problem that needs to be tackled, and the gray zone, I think, has to be closed. So the accountability gap has to be closed.
I mean, people talk about the threat of, and it's very cliche, and I know it's been said for a long time, of a cyber 9/11. Could you just explain, what would that look like?
Well, I hope we can avoid something of the magnitude of 9/11. But on the other hand, there's quite a bit that's happening already, maybe more in a drip fashion, where infrastructure is attacked or elections are being manipulated. I think looking for one massive, or cyber Pearl Harbor, as people call it, one massive event to change the course of history may actually be missing the point that there's already so many smaller events happening that really should be stopped. And so I hope that we will not see something, of the paralyzing of, let's say, the electricity grid, or the definitive manipulation of elections, or the shutting down of critical services like hospitals or media or something of that caliber. But it's all possible. It's all possible because essentially connectivity can mean vulnerability if there's not the proper cybersecurity and checks and balances in place.
All countries have to be able to defend themselves in cyberspace, supported by their militaries, their security services, and a huge and growing private cyber industry. Some states, too, possess serious cyber offensive capabilities. These include the United States, the United Kingdom, Israel, China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. It's an area that's shrouded in secrecy and rarely, if ever, avowed. Take, for an example, the Stuxnet attack on Iran. It first became public knowledge in 2010, US and Israeli hackers are thought to have used a cyber attack to destroy computers involved in uranium enrichment at a time when the world feared the imminent development of Iranian nuclear weapons.
I'm not going to speculate about who, what, when, where, but just as a piece of code, it was very, very sophisticated. So it avoided some of the perils of other cyber weapons. I mean, cyber weapons are called viruses for a reason. You know, they're launched in, they look for something, they mutate, they infect other things. Unlike human viruses, you know, they do have initially at least, they have a commanding mind, but once they're released, you know, they can go places that you don't intend them to go to. They can be caught and reverse engineered by other people and released further. Where Stuxnet was very clever was it was designed to do a very specific thing, which was to find a particular type of, I think, Siemens bit of hardware. And if it didn't quite find it, it would stop after 3 attempts and just die. Even then, there is evidence that Stuxnet infected and affected a bunch of, you know, tens of thousands of machines in Indonesia, which last time I checked wasn't a major protagonist in the Iranian nuclear program tensions. So you can see the risks there with these things. You know, they are viruses. They're not like conventional weapons in that respect. When they're launched, you have to take great care that you know what you're doing.
To give a sense of the scale of hostile activity going on in the cyber dimension of the grey zone, the National Cyber Security Centre defended the UK from more than 700 cyber attacks in the year to August 2020. Roughly about half of these are attributed to hostile states and the other half to criminals.
Who are the biggest state threats? Who are the ones that are the main actors?
The top 2 hostile actors from the point of view of a country like the UK are China and Russia, but you lump them all together as if, you know, it's sort of Chaz and Dave. It's not. They're completely different actors. Russia is projecting an area in which it's strong from a general position of strategic weakness, but it's good at cyber, so it uses it to its advantage, and it uses it to play in the great power space, so it uses it for classical, you know, traditional statecraft motives, espionage, strategic advantage, you know, disinformation and so on. So it's used as a method of projecting, you know, what's left of Russian state power.
An example of this is a massive cyber hacking campaign against the United States that was first discovered in December 2020. US officials have blamed Russia for what they say could be the most serious ever cyber breach of US government systems. It's still being investigated. Then there's the alleged cyber threat from China.
China, the origins of China's cyber capabilities are economic. In the first decade of this century, a huge sort of ecosystem of Chinese cyber attack built up that was basically designed to advance China's economic expansion through getting commercial advantage, whether that was through espionage, whether it was through stealing somebody else's design of a car, whatever it was. It, of course, still spied on governments and that sort of thing, but that was basically the way the Chinese cyber attack system worked. It's conceptually quite simple, it's just they're trying to attack us, and our job is to try and make sure that it does as little harm as possible.
Moscow and Beijing both deny allegations that they're behind hostile cyber activity. Cyber attacks have caused huge economic damage, but so far, no confirmed avoidable deaths. There was a case in the German city of Düsseldorf in September 2020 when a hospital, under a ransomware attack, was unable to admit a woman suffering a life-threatening illness. Instead, her ambulance had to travel to a second hospital, delaying her treatment. She died, but it's not clear whether she would have died anyway, making it hard to say for sure that her death was caused by the cyber attack. The potential for patient deaths on a massive scale is the fear that raced through Kieran's mind on the 12th of May 2017, when he received a call to say a cyber attack had disrupted services at several UK hospitals.
Right now, the safest way to bank is from home. At Lloyds Bank, there's so much you can do to manage your money online. From viewing statements to managing direct debits to paying bills. You can speak to a mortgage advisor by video or over the phone, and even pay in cheques using our app. If you do need to visit, most branches are open 9:30 till 2, Monday to Friday. Please wear a face covering and observe social distancing to protect yourself and our colleagues. Lloyds Bank, by your side. Terms and conditions apply.
WannaCry was a very simple bit of ransomware that caused chaos.
Harold Thimbleby is a professor of computer science at Swansea University. He gave evidence to a parliamentary committee that looked into the WannaCry attack.
If we back up to why it happened, Microsoft developed software that's called XP, which nobody uses anymore, but it has ended up being used in all sorts of things like MRI scanners and blood systems and all sorts of things. And basically people lost track of it and Microsoft stopped supporting it. But the National Security Agency in America discovered a backdoor into XP. And unfortunately, hackers got hold of that Eternal Blue, as it's called, vulnerability in XP.
Professor Thimbleby is referring to a hacking tool called Eternal Blue that was developed by the US spy agency, the NSA. But a hacking group called Shadow Brokers leaked Eternal Blue online in April 2017 in what's been described as one of the most destructive NSA breaches in history. The identity of the leakers has never been revealed, but their action gave hackers around the world a US-made cyber exploit to play with.
And it probably ended up in North Korea, where probably the North Korean state developed WannaCry to exploit this bug in Windows XP. And a few minutes later, lots of people were suffering from WannaCry on their old XP systems. That's the gist of it.
Can you give a sense of like what happened in real time from the moment they kind of did their bug and unleashed it to when actually there was like a real time impact?
Okay, so somebody would switch on their computer and a red screen would come up and say, you've got WannaCry, and if you want to have your data back, send us some money. It's what's called ransomware. So it was encrypting all the data on the computer, so the computer was basically useless, but saying, send us some money and we will give you the key to get your data back.
And what was the effect of that on the public, on real life?
On real life, lots of computer systems, old XP systems stopped working, and the NHS was one of the main users of old XP systems. Like if you buy a cyclotron or an MRI scanner, it's run by a computer, and I guess the NHS leaves these computers running and it all seems fine, but it has still got flaws in it because they haven't kept it up to date. It costs money to keep software up to date. So you're saving money and it seems to work fine. And unfortunately, the hackers broke in.
For Kieran Martin from the National Cyber Security Centre, the first he heard about the attack was as he was heading home at the end of the working week.
I was in a train home on a Friday afternoon, turned back.
What did it look like when you first started to see that there was a problem? The technical people, what did they say?
Well, actually, the first thing is that it unfolds kind of on Twitter, So I think there was a regional NHS organisation which started saying, we're experiencing difficulties. And then other things in other countries started to say the same thing. And then it was, the incident people picked it up and went, there's something weird going on here. And then, I rang a senior official at the Department of Health and said, yeah, we're starting to get stuff.
At that moment, computers at hospital receptions and GP surgeries were freezing, ambulances were having to be diverted, and MRI machines could no longer perform scans.
There was this feeling of real fear at the start about was this going to impact patients. And given what we saw in Dusseldorf the other week, you can see why we felt that. And so that was the principal thing on the Friday afternoon.
The NHS's digital service sent out their first alert that something was wrong at 1 p.m. after receiving reports from 4 NHS trusts of ransomware attacks hitting multiple NHS services. The number of trusts reporting problems quadrupled over the next 3 hours. That was when NHS England declared a major incident.
I arrived back at the office after the train. I know we've got to brief the Home Secretary at 7 o'clock or whatever it is, and you just have to make sure, and that forms a forcing function about getting the information picture, working out what the comms options are, etc., etc.
Paul Chichester is the Director of Operations at the NCSC, who we met in the previous episode.
As the day went on, you started to get a sense of just the scale and the enormity of it, as obviously people were reporting in and hospital, were being disrupted. Partly that was actually organisations shutting their systems down as a precautionary measure, not the WannaCry ransomware sort of having an impact. So that was, a lot of disruption was done just by sort of, trying to sort of turn things off and put them in a safe space or safe state. So that was kind of through the Friday. At that point, it was really trying to get our hands on the actual malware and get our hands on the technical details, trying to understand what was going on.
This was not just a UK problem. The WannaCry virus was freezing screens and demanding ransoms around the world, with more than 200,000 computers affected in at least 150 countries. It's a ransomware worm, which means it's able to spread from computer to computer without the need for someone to click on an infected link. Victims ranged from universities in China to the global delivery firm FedEx and the Nissan car plant in Sunderland. A message on people's computer screens told them their files had been encrypted and they must pay $300, rising to $600, to unlock the data. Official advice was not to pay up, because that would be rewarding the hackers. Plus, there's no guarantee your files would then be restored. As the worm spread, government cyber experts around the world, including at GCHQ in the UK, were trying to work out how to stop it. Simultaneously, and without any official instruction or coordination, individual hackers and cybersecurity companies were also logging onto their computers to help.
I think I had just got back from lunch and I had noticed kind of a lot of news about this attack going on.
Marcus Hutchins, a self-taught hacker, was taking a week off from his work for an American cybersecurity firm. It was early afternoon on the 12th of May, and the 22-year-old was at home in the seaside town of Ilfracombe in North Devon, where he lived with his parents.
Yeah, so as kind of a career, I track malware spread. So this was kind of right up my alley, and I just saw it spreading, and I thought, hey, like I'm not working today, but this looks like a big deal, so I'm gonna take a look at it. So I kind of just I got on the forums, I got on Twitter, and I tried to find out as much information as I could before kind of diving into it myself.
What does it mean, like diving in? Like I'm kind of having visions of like the Matrix. Is it kind of like that? Can you just explain what it is, what you do?
So I basically I get a copy of the malware or virus, and then I reverse engineer it to find out kind of what it does, like what the code is doing, try and get an idea of what its intention is, how it's spreading, and I just try and build up the best picture I can of what the malware does.
And so, can you just recall back to that day when you were sort of, trying to investigate what was going on? Like, what were you seeing? What was happening?
So I noticed a lot of outbound connections to the SMB service, which was strange for this kind of malware. And
what does that mean? Sorry. What does that mean?
Yeah, so it was connecting to other networks, like it was trying to remotely connect to just random networks, and it was going through a list. It wasn't any kind of structure. It was just kind of picking a random IP address, connecting to it, and this was not common for this kind of malware. So when I was digging into it, I kind of realized, oh, this is spreading computer to computer. This isn't distributed by email or spam. This is actually spreading between computers.
And so then what happened?
So then I also noticed it was connecting out to domain which was not registered. And this is something we often do for our job, is if we see unregistered domains or any kind of anything in the malware that would allow us to track the spread, we will kind of get in on that. So I went and I registered this domain so that I could see how many computers were being infected, how fast it was spreading, kind of what countries it's targeting, and kind of found out a bit after that the activation of the domain also was capable of killing the malware itself and completely stopping the spread.
For those who, like me, aren't particularly technical, what this means is that Marcus inadvertently found a kill switch for the ransomware worm. By registering the name of the domain he mentioned, in order to have a better sense of the scale of the attack, Marcus actually managed to stop the virus from being able to spread any further.
And how did that feel when you realised that?
it didn't feel real because often like malware like this is incredibly hard to stop, and it was not this kind of big feat. It was just registering the domain, which we do like on a daily basis hundreds of times, was enough to disable this threat. So it was a mix of like, wow, we've stopped something really big, and also that was way too easy.
How quickly did you realise the enormity of what you'd done?
So as soon as I realized I'd killed it, I knew how big of a deal it was, because obviously the intention of registering the domain was to track the spread. So we actually knew how fast it was spreading and how many systems it was affecting already. So just kind of knowing that we had stopped it was already a big deal.
This all happened that Friday afternoon, as the rest of the world of cybersecurity was also still scrambling to understand the attack. It took time for everyone to realise the impact of Marcus's quick thinking, and even though the rate of new WannaCry infections started to drop, there were still huge numbers of infected computers to grapple with. It made for a long, tense Friday night, Saturday and Sunday for Kieran, Paul, the NCSC and the top secret cyber team at GCHQ in Cheltenham.
It was mayhem because, even in terms of our capabilities at the time, it was very early on in the NCSC's life.
While Kieran was in overall charge and responsible for briefing ministers and the public, Paul was focused on stopping the attack, fixing the damage and finding out who was responsible.
Certainly through sort of Saturday, we felt this wasn't a normal cyber criminal attack. And then as we built up, over the sort of following 48 hours, we were in a fortunate position to be able to pull different parts of that intelligence jigsaw together. And so we were pretty confident fairly early on of kind of what was going on.
There was suspicions, it took us months to prove it was suspicions that it was North Korean because it bore some similarities to some attacks they'd been doing on banks across the world in previous months, but because it was ransomware, people thought it was criminal. But actually, we parked the whole attribution thing because, frankly, I don't think people using the NHS cared whether it was the North Koreans or criminals. They just wanted to know when their appointment would be rescheduled and whether the NHS, and we wanted to work out what was happening with NHS systems.
I think the key pivot point for us was the Monday morning, and what we really didn't know was facts you learn when you do this job that are nothing to do with cyber necessarily are, over 1 million people, 1 million citizens turn up to an NHS point on a Monday morning every Monday. And so what we wanted to make sure was that all of those citizens got the NHS care they were going to turn up for. And so that was a kind of key point. And actually when everything started to come back online on the Monday, we sort of started to be more relaxed. And I think the one thing I've always said when I talk about this is the amazing sort of work that went on behind the scenes of the NHS and, doctors' surgeries and hospitals of actually sort of patching systems and getting systems back up over about 24 hours was absolutely incredible.
Despite the quick response, the cyber attack's impact on the real world was huge. In England, it touched a third of NHS trusts and almost 1 in 10 GP surgeries, affecting almost 20,000 patients. The crisis took a week to resolve, though it took much longer to update computer systems and repair the damage at a total cost of some £92 million. No NHS organisation paid the ransom, but some other victims did. 3 months after the attack, it was reported that the hackers had withdrawn more than £100,000 in Bitcoin ransoms from 3 online wallets they'd set up to receive payments.
All of this is a million miles away from military strategy and military capabilities, and that's the big thing I keep thinking we need to remember. This is very much in the civilian consumer space. It's affecting real people in their ordinary lives.
Right now, the safest way to bank is from home. At Lloyds Bank, there's so much you can do to manage your money online. From viewing statements to managing direct debits to paying bills. You can speak to a mortgage advisor by video or over the phone, and even pay in cheques using our app. If you do need a visit, most branches are open 9:30 till 2, Monday to Friday. Please wear a face covering and observe social distancing to protect yourself and our colleagues. Lloyds Bank, by your side. Terms and conditions apply.
On the 19th of December 2017, the UK and the US accused North Korea of unleashing the WannaCry attack. A year later, the US Justice Department charged a North Korean man with alleged involvement in a series of cyber attacks, including WannaCry, and also the hack against Sony Pictures that we covered in episode 3. Pyongyang has strongly denied the allegations. I asked Marcus Hutchins how stopping a suspected North Korean cyber attack had changed his life.
So I'd always been fairly anonymous. I didn't really publish my real name or identity because I like to just have a pseudonym. So about a day after WannaCry, the media actually found out who I was and published my real name and my location in the paper. So I kind of went from like my online name was known, but my real identity was very unknown. And I went in a day from being this kind of unknown name to my face and my name and my location is plastered all over the news across the world.
And how was that?
It was not fun.
Yeah. And were you living with your parents at the time?
Yeah, I was.
So what did they make? Did they know that you were this kind of tech genius?
I wouldn't say genius, but they knew I was into tech and they knew I kind of worked in security. They didn't know a lot about what I did because I worked from home. So there was this kind of at first they didn't even think I had a real job because I was just in my bedroom on my computer all day.
Naming and shaming the perpetrators of a cyber attack is a relatively new phenomenon. UK spy agencies used to avoid identifying a particular country for fear of creating diplomatic headaches or of giving away details of an investigation that could be useful to the attackers. That's always going to be a consideration, but today, attribution is increasingly part of a nation's response to a state-backed cyber attack because it shines a real-world spotlight onto this murky area of the grey zone. Seeking prosecutions is another way to fight back. It's a US policy that began during Barack Obama's time as president, even though the chances of ever bringing, say, a foreign state hacker to trial are minimal.
So every cyber attack is a crime, but obviously, we're not going to see Chinese 3PLA officers in court or Russian intelligence officers. So there was a lot of skepticism when the Obama administration started to publish indictments about cyber attacks. But it turned out it was actually, it didn't cure the whole problem, but it was quite useful. It was useful in several ways. Firstly, the Americans used to complain to the Chinese and say, right, you're attacking us. And because cyber attacks, one of the advantages of them from an attacker's point of view is that they're deniable. How do you know it's us? And the Chinese state would say that to the Americans for years, and they'd say, well, show us the evidence. And for years the Americans would say, well, we can't because it's classified. And then all of a sudden the Americans were saying, well, here's a 26-page indictment from the 4th District Court of the state of Pennsylvania. Do you care to answer it? Here's the evidence. So it was the calling out matter. Secondly, and you saw this with China and to some extent Iran and so on, less so with Russia. Indictments, being a state-sponsored or state-tolerated hacker in some of these countries is quite a good job. And if you're under indictment, it means you can't travel to the West. Well, that's a big deal if you're an affluent person in a non-Western country. You might want to go to the United States, but you can't because you've got the FBI warrant on your head. You can't go to anywhere in the European Union because they've all got extradition arrangements with the US. So, there is an impact on that sort of thing. So,
and is that kind of what the UK has done too? Because obviously we've seen over the last few years much more coordinated attribution of attacks.
So I think the one thing the UK hasn't figured out how to do yet, I think it's just a matter of a different legal system from the US, is how to do the equivalent of indictments, because the prosecution authorities work in a different way. So as far as I know, we haven't issued any sort of indictments any prosecution orders against sought extradition against state attackers. But the other things about using diplomatic pressure to call out, definitely. And I think that's a good thing.
The very creation of the National Cybersecurity Centre was part of the UK's efforts to combat the growing grey zone threat from cyberspace. The idea was conceived in around 2015 when David Cameron was Prime Minister.
There were basically two models, and we tried to adapt the best of both. So model one was you do it out of the deep state. You have a covert intelligence collection capability and lots of very skilled people using powers that only specialist bits of government have, and you find out what the Russians are up to and what the Chinese are up to and so on. But everything's classified. But what's the point of knowing that someone's been attacked by a state actor if you can't tell the victim or you can't do something about it? So Model 2 that you have in some other countries is sort of a very open, very civilian, non-national security organisation that gives good advice and so on. But the point is, there's quite a lot of commercial companies that can do that. Some of them are very big, some of them are very, very good. So what's the government doing, trying to compete with them? So we tried to put the two together, and that's what the NCSC was, essentially.
The NCSC supports government departments and deals with the public, from individuals to companies, helping them cope with cyber breaches and raising awareness about cybersecurity.
So it had the sort of top secret capabilities and people and powers, but it reversed the presumption of secrecy. We do need to keep some things. We did need to keep some things secret, and no doubt after my time we still do. But the presumption was that when you can, tell people about a particular type of threat, you should.
Kieran left government at the end of August 2020 and is speaking to me from Oxford University, where he now works as a professor at the Blavatnik School of Government.
How do you see the cyber domain evolving?
For me, the single biggest thing that I think we need to do to develop it is a bit like the general environment. You need to just improve it. You need to improve its health and its security. So, of course, I'm not a cyber pacifist. I think we need to retain sort of freedom to act when necessary. But I just think countries like this one, all over Europe, North America, that sort of like-minded, open, free societies, we have far more to lose from an insecure internet and insecure digital environment than we have to gain from it. So the most important thing we can do, as well as develop all these capabilities, the single most important thing we can do is just get some steps, make some effort to just make technology safer, because it's just the same as improving the environment, the air quality, the water quality. It's like that. We are living every day in this environment, so let's improve it. Let's make it a nicer, happier, safer, easier to navigate safely place to operate.
But to improve this environment, it's important to understand the many other ways cyber can be used to cause and, crucially, to prevent harm. In fact, the UK has created a whole new cyber force to better exploit cyber power. Jeremy Fleming, the director of GCHQ, and General Sir Patrick Sanders, commander of the military's Strategic Command, reveal for the first time new details about the only avowed offensive cyber operation launched by the UK. It targeted the terrorist group Islamic State, in the grey zone of cyberspace, and in the war zones of Iraq and Syria.
And I think it sends a really strong signal that we and our allies, we're not going to leave cyberspace as an uncontested place. We have to defend it. We have to make sure it's as secure as possible.
But that's next time, as we continue into the grey zone. Into the Grey Zone is a Sky News podcast. It was edited and produced by Chris Scott, with production support from Sophia McBride and Michael Greenfield, and narrated by me, Deborah Haynes. The head of Sky News Radio is Dave Terrace. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.